I got the second dose of my COVID vaccine yesterday. So if I seem a little sickly, I feel a little sickly. I might have to turn the fan on, I'm really hot. Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary, and today's video is going to be all of the books that I read in April. I should have told you that I loved you one more time. Now, if you've seen my April TBR, you know that I had 13 books that I was supposed to read in the month of April. If you haven't, I'll link that somewhere in case you want to watch it now. I think it's a fun video. I did only manage to read 12 books in April, and several of them were not on my TBR. So I read a lot, but I didn't quite read what I was supposed to read, if that makes sense. But now I'm just going to do my reading stats really quickly. I read from authors from 4 different countries. I read 1 book published in the 19th century, 1 book published in 2001, 1 book published in 2011, 1 book published in 2014, 2 books published in 2015, 1 book published in 2017, and 5 books published in 2018. So pretty much all backlist this month. I also read from 8 female and 4 male authors. I read from 1 trans male author, which isn't something that I usually keep track of, but it's something that I wanted to note because the book that I read, I believe, was published under their dead name, so I'm not gonna say it, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the appropriate protocol for this is, but I just wanted to I guess mention that. I read from 7 white authors, 2 black authors, and 3 Asian authors this month. I read 4 young adult books, 8 adult books, and then 0 middle grade, 0 new adult, etc. I read 0 books off my own TBR, and my goal, if you don't know, is to read 1 book that I owned previously. I'll link my own TBR video somewhere so you can watch all of the books that I own. I did read 2 books via ebook, 2 books via audiobook, 5 books physically, 2 books using a combination of ebook and audiobook, and 1 book using a combination of audio and physical. And then I read 1 contemporary, 1 classic, 2 nonfiction, 1 science fiction, and 7 fantasy books, which is interesting. I usually don't read that much from one genre, I don't think. I read a total of 4,900 pages. And that is not including the pages that I read from books that I didn't finish. Last month I did include pages that I read from books that I didn't finish, but this month I was like, I don't really want to figure that out, so I'm not going to.
And just remember, no one will ever be able to hate you more than you already hate yourself.
I read 2 1-star books, 0 2-star books, 2 3-star books, 5 4-star books, and 3 5-star books. Which is an average of 3.6 stars. I read 2 books that I really didn't like this month. But now, without further ado, let's just get into the first book that I finished in April. The first book that I finished in April was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book I really enjoyed. I read this as part of my Reading Books Kira Foster gave 5 stars vlog, which I'll link somewhere in case you haven't seen that. But it's basically about these 2 magicians who are having to duel, but it's not really fighting. They just make different exhibits in this circus, and a lot of the book is them figuring out, and I guess the reader as well, figuring out why they have to do this and what it really means. I gave the book 4 stars. It's not as plotless as I think people say, but it is very unexplained. So if you are the type of person who has to have a hard magic system and have things explained to you, not the book for you, which I'm sure you already knew because this book came out 10 years ago. But I will say the description is beautiful. The writing was beautiful. It's a really atmospheric read, which is something that I can really appreciate. I really enjoyed it, and I do think upon reread, I could think this is a 5-star book. The next book that I finished in April was The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh, which is a 1001 Nights retelling. I've been saying 1001 Arabian Nights, but it's just 1001 Nights. I don't know where I got the Arabian from. I'm not really sure. I think I combined it with that song from Aladdin. You know what I'm talking about? This book I also gave 4 stars. And this follows basically, it's a 1001 Nights retelling. So it's this young prince of a kingdom, and he marries a new girl every day and kills her at dawn by strangling her with a silken cord. And our main character's best friend, or childhood friend, was recently killed, so she volunteers to be the next victim. And her plan to get out of it is that she tells him a story every night, and she doesn't finish. She ends it on a cliffhanger, so he lets her live. That's basically the premise. I I really liked it. I'm having a hard time remembering a lot of the things that happened, and I think part of that is because I listened to it as an audiobook. But I did really enjoy it. There's like a little bit of a love triangle element because she has like this childhood sweetheart that she grew up with, that like you get some of his point of view as well as he's trying to come rescue her. And she's like, I don't know, she's spending so much time with this prince that she's kind of falling in love with him as well. So there's a little bit of that going on. And this is the second Renee Ahdieh like series that I've started to read. This one is just a duology, but I'm also reading I'm currently reading The Damned by Renee Ahdieh, which is the second book in her like paranormal romance thing. And what I've noticed from her is that she gives us hints of magic in the first books, but there's not like any real fantastical elements. Like in this one, you know, there's like a magic carpet, but like the characters don't really learn how to use it. And there's like hints that the main girl, whose name is Shazi, I can't remember what her full name is, but they call her Shazi. She like, there's hints that she has some sort of magical ability, but you don't really know the extent of it. The third book that I read was the Merry Spinster, and this is the one who I believe the author published it using his birth name or like dead name. But his name now is Daniel M. Lavery, Lavery. So, I gave this book 1 star. I hated it. It's a collection of short stories, and they're fairy tale retellings. And that's it. But my problem with retellings is that you have to change something for a retelling to really be a retelling. And like, the whole point was that these were supposed to be retellings that made the stories more horrific than they originally were. But I don't know if you guys have read original fairy tales. They're pretty freaking horrific. So like, I didn't feel like any of them were really improved upon. There was 1 or 2 that I remember like enjoying, but even those I would probably say were like a 3 to 4 star. Short fiction is so tricky because you have to be able to create this cast of characters and make the reader invested in them and then tell their story and then wrap it up. But it's like, because these stories were about characters that the reader was presumably already familiar with, it felt like the author didn't do any of the work to make us like see the characters, I guess. I don't really know. I wasn't a fan. Yeah, it wasn't for me. The next book that I read was Pride and Prejudice, and I read this as part of my Jane Austen book club buddy read that I'm doing. If you would like to join, let me know. I will link the announcement video, and then also we did a live show for this one, and it's me, Victoria over at A Musical Bookworm, and Amanda at her Pacific Northwest Washington Life. I will link both of their channels and Instagrams down below, and I will link that live show in case you want to watch it. We just discussed Pride and Prejudice, and I gave Pride and Prejudice 5 stars. It's the only Jane Austen reread for me. I loved it way more than I remember loving it when I read it for school originally, but it's basically the story of Elizabeth Bennet, and it's her love story with Mr. Darcy. And he's like this grumpy, prideful, pretty rude, and like socially uncouth, I guess. But he's pretty wealthy, and so it's about him, and then Elizabeth Bennet and the Bennet sisters. She has 4 sisters, and her parents are trying to marry all of them off because the way that their estate works is that it passes to the next male heir, and there's not a male heir. So once Mr. Bennet dies, the girls will be homeless, basically. That's the premise of a lot of like Jane Austen stuff. Like Sense and Sensibility was a similar type of thing. But yeah, I really loved it. I felt like the characters in Pride and Prejudice feel so real to me. And Jane Austen does such a good job of writing dialogue between characters. I really did love it, and I do highly recommend it. I also watched the 2005 film again, just because why not? Also, the 2005 adaptation does a really good job of retaining the dialogue from the book. Next, I read Vanishing Twins by Leah Dietrich, which I actually enjoyed a lot more than I thought I would. So it's a memoir about this woman's marriage. And she's talking about how it's like this time in her marriage where she told her spouse, they were like kind of growing apart, and so they decided to see other people. and she wanted to date other women. She's married to a man, but she wanted to like experiment with dating and having relationships with women. Like, that's not the kind of thing that's like really interesting to me, but what I did like about this book was the way that she wrote it was like very experimental. So it was like short little sections. And then she would talk about like her experiences being a ballerina growing up and how she was very self-aware. She's the type of person that you can tell was in therapy, because she's very self-aware that like she attaches herself to other people and to ideas, and like that's what she did with her husband. And so as soon as she started to notice that he wasn't her, she was like, well, I need a break and need to find someone who is more like me. It was a very interesting like conceptualization of someone's like thought process. My 12-year-old boy, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I thought it was a really interesting way to tell that story. I also thought it was interesting because now her and her husband are still married. I think they've closed their relationship back to where it's just them, and they have kids. So I think that's like, or they have a kid. I don't know if they have multiple kids, but I just thought it was interesting that like I don't know, she didn't write this book about her whole life. She wrote this book about like 4 to 6 years of her marriage, and that's it. I thought it was a really interesting book. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that. Then I read The Book of M by Peng Shephard, which I loved. I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. This is like a sci-fi dystopian book set in like the near future. It's like set like now basically, but essentially what happens is people start losing their shadows, and when you lose your shadows, you lose your memories. And then there's all sorts of other stuff that happens, but it basically follows this man and his wife lost her shadow 7 days ago. And they've been staying at this hotel because when the world kind of ended, like when people started losing their shadows left and right and like everything got really scary, they were at a hotel for their friend's wedding. And so he and his wife have stayed in this hotel this whole time. And it's been like 2 years since the world pretty much ended. And when we open up the story, it's 2 years after that happens, and his wife has lost her shadow 7 days ago, and he goes out to go find supplies and food for them, and he hasn't left in 7 days because he's scared that he'll leave and she'll forget about him and forget stuff, and he comes back to their hotel room and she's gone. And we also follow Max, his wife, in her, like, where she went, what she's doing. And so like you follow all these different perspectives, and it's really cool to figure out how they all merge together. And it has kind of the same vibe as like The Stand by Stephen King mixed with like a zombie apocalypse. But I absolutely loved this book, and I would highly recommend it. And I think I did a really bad job explaining it, but I really loved it. And then I read The Awkward Thoughts of W. Kamau Bell by W. Kamau Bell, which is the memoir of a like comedian, TV personality type person. When you read memoirs of people who are famous, but you don't know them for being famous, I think it's kind of hard to read. So I really enjoyed his perspective on certain things. Like, he is a black man, he's married to a white woman, so he has a lot of interesting things to say about like the dynamics of an interracial relationship. And he talks a lot about being like black in like a comic space and how hard he had to work to like diversify the people around him. He talks about his childhood a bit and like growing up and like what his family is like. Oh my god, also his cousin is N.K. Jemisin, which is wild because I also read an N.K. Jemisin book this month. But I thought that was really interesting. But like I think he did a good job of like integrating the like history of comedy sort of, and like comedy since he's been in the comedy scene with his life and how things in that have affected him. And like I appreciated that he didn't just focus on his career as much. He focused on like the early days of his career, which helped me feel like I could get to know him as I was reading it. Because I feel like a lot of famous people's memoirs are like about them being famous. And if you don't know if you don't know that person for being famous, I think it can be kind of hard to get into. I also liked that he had funny takes on things. I did skip certain sections because he talked a lot about sports and like the Rocky movies and what actor? some actor who's really famous, but like it's just stuff that I don't really care about as much. So I definitely like found myself skimming sections, kind of jumping forward to get back to like the parts of the book that I found interesting. So I ended up giving it 3 stars because I did find a fair amount about it interesting. I just didn't love it overall. Then I read the other book that I really hated this month, which was Boomer 1 by Daniel Torday, which is a contemporary. It's technically set in like 2010, I think, 2010 or 2011. And it's basically about this guy, Mark, who got a PhD, was in this bluegrass band, and he had this girlfriend, and he tried to propose to her, and she rejected him. He couldn't get a job after he did his dissertation. That was what it was. He couldn't get a job in academia, and so he goes, basically, he moves back home to his parents' house, and then he had to, or he didn't have to, he starts working at this coffee shop, and he decides that the boomer generation is the reason that he can't get a job, and so he makes these, like, videos, basically saying, like, boomers, you need to retire, or I'll retire you, and he becomes, like, wanted by the FBI. So, I hated this book for a lot of reasons. One is that it relied fully on stereotypes. And I read a little bit about the author, and apparently he is Gen X. So he's like, millennials are complaining babies. I don't really know. But like he had this whole, it felt like he had a vendetta against both boomers and millennials. And so he wrote a book that used like bad stereotypes of boomers, bad stereotypes of millennials, as if to paint, without saying anything about his generation, as if to be like, my generation is the only one that makes sense. Which I just think is a cringy thing to do. I thought it was boring. I thought it was lazy. So, I gave it a 1 star. I really hated it. I thought about DNFing it, but then I was like, what if it gets better? It didn't. Then I read A Life of Pi by Yann Martel, which was not on my TBR again. So, Night Circus, not on my TBR. Wrath and the Dawn, I think was. Merry Spinster, not on my TBR. Life of Pi, not on my TBR. So, that's where I'm at. But I read Life of Pi. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. And it's about the guy, it's like a guy in India, Pi. And he and his family are zookeepers in India. And they get this opportunity to immigrate to Canada. And so they're on this like cargo ship with all their zoo animals because they're going to sell them to different zoos along the way. And something happens and the cargo ship sinks. And so Pi ends up on a lifeboat with like a tiger and some other like animals from the cargo ship. And it's about him surviving on the ocean for 227 days with these animals. And like, when I tell you that the ending completely like blew my mind, I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was so imaginative. I loved the groundwork that the author put in to be like you spend probably the first quarter to a third of the book in India. Probably quarter. I'm probably being dramatic by saying third. But you spend a good chunk of time in India with Pi talking about when I was a kid, my dad did this to teach us the dangers of the tiger. And like, he tells you about all of the animals that you're going to meet later and how they interact with each other. And he talks about different things and how like some animals can bond, even though in the wild they would never have known each other, but they'll bond in captivity. And like, he just lays such a good groundwork. Because I remember I was reading the first bit and I was like, okay, can we just get on with it? Because all I knew about it was that he was on a boat with a tiger, and I wanted to get that to that point. But I truly think that like the way the author just explained everything made it so like, I don't know, it just made it so much more powerful when you would get to certain scenes. So, highly recommend that book. I love it. I can't believe I didn't read it until right now. And then I read the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, which is wild. I can't really explain this book very well, but I've also never really heard other people explain it, so I think maybe I'm okay by not knowing how to explain it. But essentially, it's about this world where there are the 4 seasons, and then every so often there's a natural disaster that causes earthquakes and like pretty much kills off large portions of the population, and those are called 5th seasons. And so there are people in this world who practice what's known as orogeny, which means that they can quell earthquakes and like control the earth. And that's all I really feel like I can say. This book follows 3 different perspectives, and they all tie together. I will say I called how they were all going to tie together kind of early on, and I don't know if you were supposed to be able to do that. Also, part of this book is written in second person, which I didn't love. I know, I don't know. I wasn't super into that. I thought it was a little confusing. I don't think I love second person overall. Like, it doesn't ruin a book for me, but I don't know. It depends on if I'm able to put myself in the second person perspective well enough. And I felt like for this, it took a lot of mental energy for me to put myself there. But I did really enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars. And it's one of those books that, like, depending on the whole series, maybe I'll come back and give it 5 stars. I do that sometimes. If I like love a full series overall, I will go back and give every individual book 5 stars. But I haven't decided. Obviously, I haven't read the rest of the series yet. And then I read The Heart Forger by Chupeco, which is the sequel to The Bone Witch, which is one of my most disappointing reads of the year so far. And The Heart Forger was fine. I physically read this one rather than listening to it as an audiobook because I had a really hard time with the audiobook last time. But I don't know. It follows this girl, Tia, who is a bone witch. So she's a necromancer. And in her society, necromancers aren't really trusted. And the big job of the Asha, which is like the witches, the people who can do these magical things, is that they have to kill Deva, which are like monsters, essentially. Like, there's one that's like a 3-headed dragon. There's one that's like a giant frog. I don't know. But they have to kill the Deva and keep the Deva away from the people. And you know from the beginning of the first book, it's told in split perspective. So the future, where Tia is 17 years old, she's gone completely to the dark side, and she's trying to raise... You good? You okay? She's gone completely to the dark side, and she's trying to raise Deva back from the dead and, like, basically build an army with them. And then you're following her, like, learning how to be an Asha. I feel like nothing in this book is explained. I still don't know what a lot of things are. There's like this terrorist group called the Faceless, but they actually have faces. I don't know why it's called that. I feel like so many things in this book are just like, I don't understand them. I will say I don't mind the romance that's happening. I in fact kind of like it. I didn't think I would like it because the author sets up a love triangle that you know how it's going to end, but you have to watch the love triangle play out, which is annoying, I thought. But also, like, in the second book, she finally comes to her senses and gets to the person she's supposed to be with. And now I'm curious about what happens to the other person, because he's, like, not in the future bits. So I'm confused as to where he is. But I will say, like, I'm hooked. I want to read the 3rd book now. I just don't understand what's really happening. I feel like I'm still, like, there's so many characters that will be brought up, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. Like, I just think there's too much going on, and I only have a vague understanding of, like, 45% of it. But am I enjoying it? Yeah. You know, more or less. I'm definitely enjoying it more reading it physically. So I do want to finish that. Hopefully sooner rather than later, because I want to retain anything that I have in my mind right now. The last book that I read in April was Dreams of Gods and Monsters by Laini Taylor, which is the 3rd and final book in the Daughters Book of Bone trilogy. I think I liked this the least out of all of those books. I gave it 4 stars, which I gave all the other ones 4 stars. I didn't think it was a bad book by any means or a bad ending. The ending was not as cathartic as I wanted it to be. If you don't know this book, basically, I'm going to tell you what the first book is about because I can't tell you what all of them are about. But Karou is a human girl who was raised partially by Chimera, and Akiva is an angel. And so the angels and the Chimera are at war. That's the setup. That's the whole thing. And then Earth is being brought into that war, kind of, is what's happening. And if you've read this 3rd book, I buddy read these with Kelly at Velvet Library, so we've talked about this a bit, but I would be really interested to hear other people's opinions on the ending of this book, because I felt like it set up a spin-off series, which I don't think there's one in the works, But like I felt like so much happened at the very end of this book that wasn't resolved at all. So like if Laini Taylor wanted to return to this world and do like a second series out of it, she totally could. Which would be interesting, but like it wasn't as satisfying for me because I wanted it to, I wanted a little bit of a like more cathartic, happier ending, I guess. But I don't know, or like an ending that felt permanent or like fixed. Because the way it ended, it didn't really feel fixed to me. It felt like it could go a lot of different ways. But that's it. Those are the 12 books that I read in April. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books and how you felt about them. If you made it to this point in the video, leave a cat emoji, anyone you want, in the comments. And give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more from me. I do post 2 videos every single week. And I will see you in my next one. Bye!
I should have told you.